Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Living Purposely on Purpose with me, Coach Lin. This is where we have real, authentic, unfiltered conversations about life, faith, hope, and purpose, and healing the parts of us that we were taught to hide. Today's guest is a powerhouse woman doing just that. I'm sitting down with Becky, a boundaries and self worth mentor for women breaking generational cycles. She's made it her mission to help high achieving moms stop guilt tripping themselves, hold their time and their line, and raise emotionally safe kids without repeating the pain that they grew up with. Through her signature program, No More Nice Girls, and her raw, lived experience approach, Becky equips women with the tools to stop apologizing for their truth and finally feel free in their motherhood and in themselves. I already know this conversation is going to be groundbreaking for some of us. So it's just get your pen, get your notebook, get ready to get some, knowledge on how this is happening and join us as we welcome Becky to our platform. So, thank you again, Becky, for joining us today. And I'm just so glad that you took the time out of your day to actually be the first interview after my surgery. So, this is very exciting for me to be back. I miss this and I miss, having this conversation with powerful women just as yourself. And tell the audience a little bit about Becky.
Oh, of course. And welcome back, Lynn. I'm sure everybody missed you. I'm so glad that your surgery went well and you're here with us. So, blessings for that. Yeah, a little bit about me and why I'm here. So, I am Becky Nieves and I am a cycle breaking mentor. And I am here just to kind of spread my word and my story and hopefully inspire and uplift whoever is here listening today.
Awesome. So I did share some of your intro with the audience, and one of the things I want to ask you was, take us back to that moment when, or that season in your life that made you realize that you actually needed to break the generational cycles that you grew up in.
I would say it was definitely a long time coming, and it wasn't, I think, one moment in time. There was definitely a straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak. But I think from a very young age, I knew something wasn't quite right. Like I said, most 14-year-olds do not say that they want to get a psychology degree to kind of figure out what was wrong with their family. And I did get the degree. It did not help as much as I thought it would. But for me, that crystallizing moment definitely came at the age of 35 when I was arguing with my father yet again over the health of my daughter and just a simple boundary that I had put in place. And I finally said, I can't do this anymore. It's not right for me, but it's definitely not right for my children to witness, me being treated in such a fashion and for their health to be disregarded as well.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, you're sharing with us that you grew up in an unhealthy environment. At 14 years old, you recognized you had the mindset to actually see that something was different with your family. And
Yes.
what made you see that? What made you figure that out at 14? What were you seeing?
I don't think it was something so much that saw, but more of what I felt. I had always felt that something wasn't quite right. And it was probably about that age where I started to just question things more. My family was such that, we didn't spend a lot of time outside of the home. And in speaking with friends at school, I realized that, this wasn't the norm. Other children were allowed to go outside and play. There wasn't as much strife as there was in my household. My household was one that, if I could describe it in one word, I would say tension. There was always an underlying tension, a walking on eggshells, so to speak. And you were always very, very careful to watch what you said and did because, in my case, it was, keeping my father happy. That was the general theme of the household. It's keep your father happy, just do what he says so that we don't have that tension in the house. And then I realized, well, while he may be happy, the rest of us aren't happy because we're literally, kind of stifling ourselves. And being way too careful with how we speak, act, and do things, and that was probably the constant theme of my childhood for sure.
Okay. Now, what you're describing sounds a lot like stuff that I experienced in a relationship that I was in. I was with a narcissistic person for a number of years, and that it made me feel unseen, unheard. I couldn't express myself the way I wanted to. I felt like I had to always walk on eggshells because I didn't know what I could say or would say that might be just something casual for me. But for him, he would take it so, you know, to another level. It felt like everything I said was an affront to him that I started to shut down. I started to lose my voice. And was that some of what you were experiencing growing up?
Absolutely 100%. And as a child, you think it's normal because that was the environment that I was born and raised in. So for many, many years, I thought that a lot of other families were like this, and not having a lot of outside influences, that's it's kind of how we were programmed and trained almost. And those lessons definitely carried me into adulthood and made me susceptible to be seen by other I seem to what I called myself a narcissistic magnet. So, like yourself, I was in a lot of relationships that definitely did not serve me, serve my purpose, and repeating that same cycle of, yeah, it's not okay to speak my truth. It's not okay for me to have my own opinions. It's not okay for me to do X, Y, and Z because I'm constantly considering the other person's feelings, thoughts, actions, all the things. And it was definitely so pervasive for me because, again, I didn't know another way. I didn't know another way was possible. And yes, it was, growing up with a narcissistic parent is very traumatizing. I call it, like small doses of PTSD throughout my childhood because there was not one single event that I could point to during my childhood and say, yes, that was the thing that, made me a narcissist magnet, right? It was a continuous cycle of events and programming that I had to recondition. And it's still a work in progress, quite honestly. It's something that takes a lot of time and a lot of recognition to kind of spot the patterns and say, okay, I'm only thinking this or doing this because it's taking me back to a certain point in my life. So it's definitely hard work for sure.
It definitely is. And spotting the patterns is, I think, the most necessary thing that we can do right now in this age and time because I feel like it's on a rise. I'm not sure if it's because more people are aware of what narcissism looks like. I know I sure certainly wasn't when I started to, be involved with this person. I felt initially like he was amazing. He was great. I thought he was such a wonderful guy. I had been single for 4 years, and I thought this was such an amazing man. But after the first 8 months of that being amazing, it started to swiftly change to control and someone wanted to really break me mentally, emotionally, spiritually with his words. He never hit me, but his verbal abuse was extremely mind shattering. It was another word that I could use. Like it was really bad. So to hear that you went through that as a child, my heart goes out to you because I can't imagine having to have grown up with that type of environment where I couldn't actually leave, because this was my parent. For me, it was a relationship and it was still so hard to break because I didn't realize I was getting stuck into a trauma bond. And that cycle of trauma bonding kept repeating itself over and over, with the love bombing and the devaluation and then the discard. And then, it was like this whole cycle that I wasn't even realizing I was a part of until I started to research narcissism and seeing what that was and knowing what it was the first thing that helped me to recognize what I was dealing with, how I could help myself, and to now reprogram how I was thinking and responded to these behaviors because it's the response that keeps it repeating. They love the response, you know? So yeah, I completely hear you. And it's so much I can say, but we're not going to be here talking about narcissism all day because we're here to talk about upliftment and things like that as well. But if there's one thing that you could share to someone that's listening right now, based on your experience as a child growing up in a narcissistic home, what would you tell that young child that is going through that right now? What would you say to them, that could possibly help them to navigate this a little bit better because they might not even recognize that that's what they are dealing with. I have many individuals from 17-year-old that even listen to this podcast, and I see my analytics and who listens, and we do have about 6% of individuals that listen that is between the 17 to 21-year old. What would you say to them?
Absolutely. The first thing that I would say to them is what I wish someone had said to me at that age. And it's that you're not crazy. Your feelings are absolutely valid. And to trust your gut. I think that, especially when you've been conditioned from childhood, growing up in that type of environment, you lose the ability to just trust your gut instinct. And I would say, tune into that inner voice, however you choose to worship, meditate, but really sit in silence, and your soul will tell you what's going on, and that you're not alone. And again, you're not crazy, because narcissists, like you mentioned before, the love bombing and the manipulation and all the things, and you never know which way is up or down. um, your soul knows for sure, 100%. And it's real, and it's a thing, and no matter what the individual is telling you, um, you have a voice for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as what I would share with ladies that are dating is exactly what you said as well. Because I remember my body telling me that, you're not safe. I felt it. I felt it, and I said, I thought it was because of my ex, because that's why I was single for 4 years. And I was trying to like figure it out. Is this me putting something on him that doesn't belong to him, but belong to someone else? And me trying to work through that because it was constantly him telling me that I was doing that. Oh, you're believing this because you're still broken from your last relationship. Because I had shared some stuff with him in the beginning. Not everything. I always knew never to share everything, but I did share a few. And what I did share, he would use it to throw at me every now and then and say, "That's why you feel this way. That's why you're responding like that. It's not me. I'm a great guy. Look at all that I do." Da, da, da. It was like it
Yeah,
was
no.
like constantly cognitive dissonance where my mind was saying, no, this isn't true. You know?
Yes, no, and narcissist, just on a last mention on that, because you mentioned how, your ex was such a great guy, and to this day, people do not believe the things that I say about my father. Like, oh, he's such an awesome guy and he's charming. I remember growing up, it was so funny when my parents would come to school, they would say that my mother was the one who looked so mean, and my dad was such an outgoing, social, gregarious guy. And yeah, I mean, he absolutely is. But there's that other side of the coin where it's like, yeah, but you don't live with him, you don't know him, because narcissists are very, very adept at hiding those features of themselves that they reserve, for behind closed doors, or covering up to making you think that it's you and not them. So, absolutely.
Absolutely. So, um, just want to say to anyone that's out there that it is dealing with a narcissistic relationship, in any form, seek help, seek support, seek a community that can, help you to navigate that as well. And, you know, don't do it alone because there is safety and resources in community. So, on that note, you work specifically, right, with high achieving moms. What patterns do you see most often in this group of women when it comes to boundaries and self worth?
Oh, goodness. I could write a whole book on this, and I probably will someday, quite honestly.
You
But
probably should. I did.
yeah. Yes, no, it's on my bucket list for sure. But there's just so many things. I mean, as women, I would say that we tend to have a self-sacrificing nature. right? Especially when we are mothers, and it's always our children first, our children first. And it, just speaking from my own experience and growing up as I did, my number one priority was I want to make sure that my children, do not feel the way I did during my childhood. So I sacrificed myself, and I didn't recognize the patterns that I was perpetuating because I was basically almost living my mother's life to a T. It was like, okay, children first, everything else second, myself dead last, right? And I think with these high achieving women, because they come from the background that they do, a lot of people pleasing, right? Because they've been conditioned to, be the good girl, the nice girl. And they've obviously achieved a level of success. So they look back at it and they say, well, I have done all the right things because here I am. I may have the husband, the house, the job, the kids. I have all of the things that I was told that I needed or that I felt that I needed, but something still isn't quite right. That gut instinct is telling you this is my purpose is not just this. It's not just to be, climbing the corporate ladder. Be even if you're a successful stay-at-home mom like I was. I did not work outside the home for 10 years. And on the outside, my life was such that, I had a nice home, I had the husband, I had the children, but I still didn't feel fulfilled. And in not fulfilling my purpose, I was doing a disservice to my children. And that's when I realized something had to change. And a lot of the women that I speak to, they feel the same way, that there's just something not quite right. And it's because they haven't gone back and done that initial work to break those cycles. And ultimately, they will pass them on to their children for sure.
For sure, for sure. We can only pass on what we know. So unless we change certain things, certain aspects of how we move in this world, we're going to train our children to move in the same manners. So definitely. So what made you decide that it's basically experiential? You're experienced in this area with your own experience. So you decided, why not I help these same women that are dealing with these same type of issues?
Yes,
Right.
absolutely. I mean, 100%. Or even seeing my sister also. We both grew up in the same household, and we both kind of took our childhood experiences in a very different way. So I would say with her experience, and not speaking too much on her own story, but there's also the high achieving woman who then becomes so independent that they're
Mm,
almost an island unto themselves. So there's also the self sacrificing for your children woman. And then there's the women who are so scared of any type of dependence whatsoever that they never reach out. They never seek support, and they just keep achieving, achieving, and going up the ladder of life without really connecting to anyone. So that's also another thing that I see quite commonly as well. And then they hit a certain age and they're like, but wait, this is it. I've hit the top of the mountain and I'm still not happy. And that's also very common as well.
okay. Wow. I can understand how that happens. Before I start to narrow down my niche to life purpose, I might have looked at things in the same way. And then I recognize that my purpose is what actually brings me joy. So it's not about achieving all of these different levels, but what exactly am I doing that is in line with who I am, who I was created to be, and what my purpose is. And once I looked at it that way and I started to move in the world on that mindset, everything changed for me. So I completely understand that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, it's definitely it's a challenge for sure. And there are women that I have counseled, and it's almost like they see the pattern, they hear what you're saying, but I think until you're in a place where you're ready to receive that information too, it's a very, very difficult transition.
absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I received, like, I literally changed my niche after I went through breast cancer, and that was 2023. So it's very recent, and it came to me in the struggles that I went through. Because normally that's where it happens, right? When you go through something very traumatic, very life changing, that you start to really dig deeper into who you are and why you're here. And that's when the shift came for me. So I absolutely agree. If you're not ready, you're not even going to hear it. It's just going to fly right over your head and you won't even get it. So most of the times, a woman that reach out to me are women that actually they're there. They see it. They see that they need a change. And I'm sure it's the same thing for you.
Yeah, no, absolutely 100%. And I agree with what you said about, I think it's during those times of challenge and struggle that really make us sit up and take a little bit more notice. I mean, I know it was the same for me. You mentioned your breast cancer story. For me, it was my daughter's rare disease diagnosis. It made me realize that something wasn't quite in alignment. And even with that shift, I think there's sometimes multiple shifts that happen. So it was a series of events and a series of traumas, I think, that ultimately led me to my purpose. So while, these struggles, I mean, there's no sugarcoating it, they suck. Nobody wants to have a breast cancer diagnosis. No one wants to have a child with a rare disease diagnosis. But I think it's in those moments you grow, or you don't thrive, you don't survive it. And I think that's a sad and unfortunate thing that happened to a lot of women.
Yeah. Yeah, we have to recognize more now than ever, I think, that it's in the stretching, that we are actually birthed strength and we're able to become greater than we've ever expected, in those moments. If we use those moments to shrink us and to um, make us lose our way, then the stretching doesn't happen. And the heights that we can be brought to actually get stunted. So, absolutely, I agree. The next question I wanted to ask you is motherhood. You mentioned motherhood. That often brings up unhealed wounds in ourselves, right? From our own childhoods. What was one of the most surprising things that motherhood revealed to you about yourself?
I would say my perfectionism.
Your
I
perfectionism.
Yes, I used to think of it as my superpower. I'm like, oh no, I can do all the things and be better and still be a mom. And then it became a challenge when I started to see myself in my daughters and how they tended to push themselves to limits that they probably shouldn't. And that gave me a lot of pause. And I needed to give both myself and them some space to be the creatures that they were meant to be. Whether it was, a report card that they weren't particularly happy with. I remember there was one moment, I remember when my daughter got her first B and she was devastated. And I said, but did you do the absolute best that you could? And she's like, Mom, there's nothing else I could have done. And I'm like, then it's okay. You did what you could do in that moment, and it's okay to get a B. Like, it's okay not to be perfect and to be on all of the time. And I think as women, particularly high achieving women, we don't give ourselves or sometimes even our children that grace and that space to say, yeah, this one time maybe it wasn't 100%, but nobody can be 100%. 100% of the time. It's just not feasible.
That's so true. Wow, perfectionism. I feel like that's whether you're a mom or not, a lot of us deal with that, but it's good that you recognized it enough in yourself and that it might be something that your children are picking up on, that they also need to be perfect. And they were now being like weighted down by that knowledge, and you were able to pour into them and let them know, no. So you broke that cycle in them.
Yes.
That's
Still a work
awesome.
in progress, still a work in progress. They are their mother's daughters. So it's always like, no, I have to do it. And I'm like, you don't have to do all the things. It's okay. But they definitely get that from me. But I think we both, now they're of an age where I can almost kind of talk to them as equals. And sometimes, obviously, age appropriate, but I'm like, hey, I struggle with this too, and sharing, and
Yeah,
we almost kind of commiserate a little bit. And I think shared experiences are such a
yeah.
powerful
Ah,
thing.
that's so true.
Yes.
Shared experiences is very powerful. I only have one son, he's 22, so we are very close. As mom and son, like literally we talk, if not every day, every week. and he's 22 years old. So, and that's because we also had a lot of shared experiences as far as me being a single mom and raising him by myself, and me being his complete support system for a lot of his, growing up years. So it works when you have that foundation built with your child, that they can look to you and know that they can trust you, that you can be supportive to them, and that they can count on you to be there. Once that is there, you're good. You're good. Your relationship is golden, because those things they never forget. Even when they grow up, even when they get married, even when they have their own place, they will never forget those things. Those are the foundation. So kudos to you on that.
Yes, it took a lot of practicing. I too have a 22-year-old son, and we're getting there. We're not to that point, but one of the things that really made me stand up and take notice of the cycles that I needed to break was I was a very different mom to him than I was to I have four, so my younger three, and I had him at a very young age, and we grew up together. And there were a lot of things that I recognized that I did not do correctly with him. And it took a lot of apologizing on my part, and working to rebuild a lot of the trust. And we were on our own the first 7 years of our lives together before I met my husband. And yeah, it's definitely a foundation and a process and something that we build on. We very jokingly say, because he can kind of poke fun at himself a little bit, which I'm kind of grateful for. He calls himself my test baby. He's like, well, I was a test. I went first, and now my siblings, they get a different mom, but it's come from a place of a lot of love and a lot of growth, and I appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to do that, because some people get so stuck in their ego that they don't even say, you know what, as a mom, I should have done better. I could have done better, and I apologize. And if you're listening right now as a mom, as a parent, even a dad, if you're listening right now and you recognize, you know what, I was not the best parent that I needed to be when my children were young. And I've learned and grown from that place. Yeah, I might show up for them now, but I didn't show up for them when they were younger. Maybe I need to call them and say, I'm sorry, and be apologetic and humble yourself enough to do that, because it takes strength, and your children will appreciate it, and they will recognize that it took you strength in order to say that. And that's a way to open up that door to actually have them to start that communication, to start building that relationship back. And who knows where that could lead? But you'll never know if you never try and if you never say anything.
And to keep trying as well. It took several attempts to kind of open that door a little bit. I mean, especially if, there's a history again of some kind of trauma or things like that, it might take a couple of apologies. It might take a couple of, or coming at it in a different way. I mean, the straight up apology in my thing is the best, but also the change behavior too. And I think with my son, he was able to appreciate seeing me parent his younger siblings to the way he was parenting. And then when I said the things that I said, finally, he could see that I meant them because my actions actually backed up the words. So it's been helpful.
Absolutely. Without first acknowledging the apology and following it up with, change behavior, they're just gonna blow you off anyway. So if you don't have change
Especially at that age.
behavior, right? They're gonna be like,
Yeah.
whatever. This dude don't even mean what he's saying anyway. I remember with my dad, we didn't have the best of relationship. My mom and my dad separated when I was like 12 years old, and we left, and he was addicted to drugs. So and very abusive to my mom. So I didn't speak to him for almost from 12 to 30. Yeah, that I didn't speak to my dad. But what made us start having a relationship was when we started talking at 30, he apologized. He told me that he was wrong. He felt very sorry for how he treated us and my mom when we were growing up. And you could tell he meant it. He cried and he shared a lot of different ways that the drugs had affected him. And not that he was, and he didn't say it in a way that you were saying, oh, he's just using it as an excuse. No, he shared it in a way for me to understand. what was happening to him in that moment and how he had changed his life and how he had cut off the drugs. I think at this point it was like 5 years he had been off the drugs, crack cocaine. So it took us a while, but within that first year from us communicating back to within that year, I saw how much he had changed. I saw how he spoke to me differently. He showed up differently. And that meant all the world to me because I was able to spend the last 10 years of his life. He had a fatal heart attack at 67. So between 30 and 40, we were able to reunite and get back closer. And I thank God for that because honestly, if that didn't occur and we were not able to mend whatever happened between us, I think as much as I did not speak to him for that time, I think I would have still been heartbroken because at the end of the day, no one is ever all evil. No one is ever all wicked. No one is ever all of any one thing. And he had moments in that childhood that was still very special to me, that he showed me so much love and care and how he spoke to me. And I still remember those days. I still remember how much of a giving father he was. Like, he was amazing. He, outside of the drugs and outside of certain things that happened, he was still a real person and he was a loving man. And a lot of his mine, I have like 14. He had 14 brothers and sisters. So I have a huge family. So yeah. And he was the first, so the oldest. Yeah. So
Yeah,
anyway.
that is a lot of responsibility. I understand the large families because I have more cousins. Every once in a while, I'll find a new cousin. So yes, no, it's definitely, and it's good that you had that, and I hope that maybe someday I can have a similar experience, with my own father. I have not spoken to my father in almost 7 years now, um, and he's definitely not in a place and where he would apologize or acknowledge some of those behaviors. And for me, I know for me that's what it would take for me.
Yeah.
There would definitely need to be an apology, an acknowledgement, and an actual proof of, okay, things are different now. Unfortunately, in my case, I think he's doubled down in some of those behaviors from my understanding, and I feel sad for him. But again, it only, I think, empowers me. He did give me a
Yeah.
gift in that, it's empowered me to find my life's purpose and to help other women who may have gone through something similar. And then there's the hope that things will change. The universe works in very mysterious ways. I never count anything out. So who knows?
Yeah. I watched this gentleman online. He's called Mental Healness. I don't know if you ever watch him. This black guy with dreads. And one of the things that he says is that narcissistic people, they don't change, especially if they don't go in therapy, because therapy is their acknowledgement that they need to do things differently. So with my father, he wasn't a narcissist. So he had issues because of the drugs. Once he started doing drugs, he was a great dad up until about 9, 10 years old. And the last 2.5 to 3 years, that's when things really changed. And that's when the drugs became more of what we were seeing in the home than anything else. But with narcissism, it's so much different. And I say this because I know people are going to watch this and listen, and they're going to think, well, they're not. My dad wasn't narcissistic. So yeah, that happened. But if you are dealing with someone that is narcissistic, um, they have to get in counsel. They have to get in therapy. I know that you all would like to hold on to the hope that they're going to come around. They're going to become that person that you met in the first year of that relationship or whatever the case is. But unless they get in therapy, it's a whole different thing. It's a personality disorder. So, and I just want to say that because I don't want someone to hear my story and think, oh, well, maybe my father was not a narcissist. He just
And
had
honestly,
a very
when you
bad addiction.
yes, and sometimes even therapy will not help a narcissist, which is probably why my father doubled down. He actually did get therapy. And do you know what it gave him? It gave him a diagnosis. So now it became a situation where it wasn't him, it was the diagnosis that he was given. So he would say, "Oh, I can't help this. I'm, bipolar." They gave him a bipolar diagnosis. So then that became his excuse for everything too. So yeah, I don't hold out too much hope. And actually, I feel very sorry for everyone who actually comes into contact with him. But you're right, narcissism is definitely a different breed, and particularly, with the cycles that you see with personality disorders. um, I looked at my family history. I was fortunate and unfortunate, I would say, that I saw multiple generations still alive on both sides of my family. Both of my grandmothers are still living, actually, and my great grandmother was living until I was 35 years old. And I could see the pattern, so I could look at my father and very clearly see why he was the way he was. And because of his mother and her mother before her and some other family events. But it wasn't an excuse, right? And it wasn't something that they were willing to see the pattern of behavior. And for sure, absolutely. Personality disorders are, I do have a psychology degree, like I said, that wasn't helpful at the time, but, you know, personality disorders are extremely hard to treat. There's not a pill you can take that's going to take away your narcissism or anything like that. So for sure,
Yeah.
it's tough.
I'm glad we cleared that up. So, tell us about your program. You have a program, No More Nice Girl. I love the name, by the way. What inspired, what inspired that name, and what are some of the biggest transformations that you've witnessed in a woman that goes through this program?
Yeah, No More Nice Girl kind of came from me brainstorming again from my own experience. I mean, I often saw that as an individual, as a professional, as a mom, as a partner, I tried to fit what mold everybody had. And I found that I was very good at it. Again, being trained from childhood. I was a chameleon. If you put me in a group of one type of people, I could be what they needed, and vice versa. And I was like, wait a minute, this is not serving me. It's not serving my purpose. um, so I had to kind of, it was a shift to have to break that. And I have 5 pillars in the program. There is the realization phase, which is generally how people would come to me. They've realized that something isn't quite right, but they really need to anchor in their why and their purpose before they're ready to move on to the next level, which is the redesign rebuild phase, where you're reparenting yourself. And there's a lot of re words in my program, and it was not intentional. When I was writing things out and journaling and doing all the things, they say you can't go back and do life again, right? um, but you can kind of go and fix the little things, reparenting yourself, rebuilding relationships, reconnecting, all of those things, where you might not be able to go into the past, but you can fix that in the place where you are now. um, so a lot of inner child work, and it all kind of culminates in a renewal. You've now rewritten your story, rewritten your legacy, and you can move forward. And the most important thing I see is women moving from making requests to forming stronger boundaries, becoming the woman that they were meant to be before life happened, before they were conditioned in a certain way. Because my program specifically deals with women who were born into, you know, some form of toxic family. And the transformation is such that they're still the high achieving woman they were, but I think they have their purpose, they have their sanity. They're not burnt out and angry and stressed all of the time, and not really knowing why. Because I think so there's a stereotype when a woman is just an angry woman and juggling all the things. And she's not necessarily angry. She just might be overstimulated. It just might be that she needs to step back and not be all the things to all the people all the time. And I think with No More Nice Girl, it gives you that permission. Not that you need it, but sometimes we do need someone to kind of hold your hand and say, yes, it's okay to let go of a commitment. Disappoint someone, even, because when you have that nice girl persona, you do not want to disappoint anyone. And it's hard for a lot of high achieving women. It's still something I work towards, but it's recognizing that pattern and just tweaking things a little bit to make more space for you.
Yeah. And I like that you said not that they need the permission, but once you have been, your mindset goes to a certain way of responding, it's hard for you to give yourself that permission because you're so used to always being agreeing, being quote unquote the nice girl. So it in that community that you form, you allow them to start recognizing that they do have an option to say maybe not today, or let me think about it, or you know what, let me get back to you on that. Because all of those things doesn't necessarily come easy to them for them to say, because their first response is to say, sure, I'll do it. Yeah, I'm here. I've been
Yeah.
here. I know what that nice girl feeling looks like. I've done it.
I have done it. There's still things that, like I said, it's a very hard pattern to break because I said you
It
don't
is.
want to disappoint people. You want to, and especially if you are high achieving, you feel
Yeah,
like you have the capacity to do it. Like I
yeah,
can, so I should. No, that's not always the case.
absolutely. Absolutely. You know, as a coach, I'm a coach, but I still have a coach. I still have someone that I meet with every single week. I can never put out there um what I don't have to give. You cannot pour from an empty cup. So unless I'm refilling myself and I'm doing the work for myself, how can I help those that come to me, right? I'm constantly learning, constantly growing, you know, to become the best version of Coach Lin. You know, I'm always going to be trying to do that. And it's great that you've created that space of cycle breaking for those individuals that come to you. Is there like a story that you can share with us where someone came to you and they had like a profound breakthrough?
Yes, absolutely. There was one woman that I spoke to, and again, she was juggling multiple things and could not see a way out of it. I mean, we always hear that term no as a complete sentence, and it sounds great in theory, not always so great in practice. And she was really struggling with, okay, she knew that out of the three things, one thing needed to go because she couldn't anymore. She was at capacity. And through a lot of the work and the healing that we did, she at the end she was very determined. She's like, I can't let the thing go. She's like, maybe if I just pull back a little in the different areas, I can still keep all three. And no, at the end she picked the one thing that was going to, she was going to step away from because she no longer had the space for it. And she had worried that, the organization that she had stepped away from was going to fall to pieces. And she was able to come back to me a few months later and say, you know what, they were okay without me. She's like, I spent years obsessing over that I couldn't leave, that the situation was going to fall apart. And she's like, and they were just fine without me. And I think it gave her the space and the permission that she needed to then look at other areas of her life where she was like, I was holding on so tightly and I didn't need to. And I think that was huge. It gave her a significant portion of her life back. It allowed her to scale back on some of the activities that she was doing and then made space for new opportunities because she was stagnant where she was. Um,
Wow.
so it was a beautiful thing to watch.
Yeah. I feel like when I have those moments with a client, it makes everything come together. It makes everything that we do worth what we do, because we do a lot of putting ourselves out there. We do a lot of trying to, you know, be there for others and make them understand what are those areas that they need to work on. We work so hard to help them to get to that place that they need to be at, where they themselves want to get to. So when we get them over that line, it's like we just want to like,
Like,
they,
yes, I will
they
be your
won't even
biggest
understand.
cheerleader. Yes,
Yes, you
no.
don't even understand how much joy that brings someone who's there, a part of that process, to help to coach them, you know, to get to that place. It's so rewarding and it's so fulfilling. I'm so happy for you and I'm so happy for your client that that happened for her.
Yeah, it was almost like you said, the joy that you feel. And the only thing I could think of is like when I watch my child take their first steps. It's almost like that, right? Where you're like, oh, are they going to do it? And then they walk away and then they start running and it's like, yay, you know,
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah.
amazing.
Oh wow. So, boundaries can be difficult for women, right? Raised in environments where speaking up was discouraged. What advice would you give to a mom listening right now who feels terrified to start holding those boundaries with her family or her loved ones?
Okay. I think the first thing that I always tell myself and clients, know the difference between a request and a boundary. They are not the same. When you make a request, you're asking someone to do or not do something that you wish to change. A boundary is when you put in place, okay, if you keep doing or not doing the thing, there's a consequence to it. And I want to say that's very different from an ultimatum as well, because I think request, boundary, and ultimatum, they kind of get mingled in together. And of
Yeah,
course, they have very negative connotations. But, a boundary is you sitting down and saying, okay, these are my non negotiables. These are the things that I absolutely cannot tolerate. And then you need to protect those things. So if the boundary is, I mean, we know the climate that we're living in right now, the boundary is we're not going to discuss politics at the dinner table, right? And, you can make that request, and then it could be, let's say denied, or the conversation continues to go in that fashion. Then you could say, okay, if we continue to have these conversations at the dinner table, I'm going to get up and leave the dinner table. And then I think the most important thing with that is you need to follow through, because if you say you're going to get up, then you need to get up. And it doesn't need to be something huge that you start with. I would say definitely start very, if you're not used to boundary setting, start super tiny. Like it could literally be something as simple as, okay, I'm going to exit a conversation, I'm going to exit a room. It doesn't need to be, like as extreme as I went with my father, as, okay, I'm just never going to talk to you again. But start tiny, start with the little things first, and then you build that confidence to move up to the bigger boundaries.
absolutely. As you're speaking, I'm remembering when I was 15 years old, I had I had a pet name growing up, and this pet name was something that I started to really dislike, you know. So I came home and I was like 16 years old, and this pet name had started to go to people in my school. They were calling me this pet name because my siblings was also, we were around the same age group, calling me this pet name in school as well. So I came home, I'm 16 years old. I said, my new name is, and if anyone says the pet name to me, I will no longer respond. And I remember my mom, she kept calling me the pet name. Pet name, pet name. I'm not saying if you can notice, right? Because y'all
Mm-hmm.
ain't gonna know it. Pet name. So I said, I ain't answering. I'm 16. I ain't answering.
Mm-hmm.
My mom would come in my room, say the pet name. I said to her, I already said, if you call me that name, I will not be responding. What did she do? She called me my name that I told her. And I said, okay, Ma, what would you like? And from then, she would catch herself calling me the pet name, and then she would say the real name that I told her to call me. My name is Tony, right? My pet name used to be something else. My pet name is now Tony. So Vermeline was always so long. So I always needed a pet name because people just would not call me Vermeline, which is my, name on my birth certificate, right? But it worked. It works if you stick to the follow through, like you said. If you stick through the follow through, and you don't have to be disrespectful about it, you don't need to, make it a negative thing. It's just, this is what makes me feel good about me. And I need you to respect that. And if you can't, then understand that this is what I'm going to put in place. And what I put in place was not to respond. Whatever you choose to put in place is your boundary setting, and boundary is actually a good thing. I learned that at 16 years old, and I continue to develop even more and more boundaries in my life as I've gotten older. So it's definitely something that we all need to implement and practice, 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 because it's not easy to continue to do it, because if you're always used to wanting to say nice, it's very difficult to continue to put those parameters in place. So great point, Becky.
No, and I love what you did with the follow up too. Like you said, you didn't make it disrespectful or negative, but then when she finally did call you the name that you wanted to be called, and you were very pleasant about it. So you gave positive reinforcement to the change behavior that you want, which then kind of almost cements that. So now, like you said, when she almost would catch herself saying the former pet name, she'd be like, oh, and then she would. So no, that was absolutely perfect. And funny story, you mentioned that I had a similar experience childhood. There was a pet name that I had that I hated. And oh goodness, it did not go away until I stopped speaking to my father. But yeah, just hearing you talk about the story just brought that memory to my mind as well, for sure. But yeah.
Yeah. I brought it up because for me, that was something so small. But for me, it meant the world at 16 to be able to put that in place. So, like you said, start small, but start developing those things until you can do bigger and bigger boundary setting in your own life. But practice small so you can build on that. Yes.
Absolutely.
So, our time is almost up. This has been amazing. But before we go, is there anything that you want to share with the audience? Anything that you forgot to say? Maybe something that you would like them to know, or how, any programs that you are currently doing that you want, them to be aware of so that they can be a part of your cycle of, your breaking cycle mentor program.
Oh my goodness. I think there's so many things, but I always like to tell people that I've met with, even if they choose not to work with me, the last thing I like to leave them with is just remember that you are not your family. You're not what they've done. That you're not even your past. You make a choice on how you want to start living today and moving forward. And I think that's the most powerful thing that you can leave someone with, that you have a choice to be something different, to be something other than the stereotype. And it took me many years to give myself that permission too, because I had labeled myself and put myself in a box. And I hate to see anyone living in a box of their own creation. And if
Absolutely.
anybody does want to work with me or find me, I am on all the major social media platforms, YouTube channel. I haven't done a podcast yet, but maybe that book is coming sooner than we think. Um, but yeah, definitely, and forgiveness. Forgive yourself first. I think as women, we are hardest on ourselves. I think anybody, though, gender aside, um, we are hardest on ourselves. And I think we need to, forgiveness starts with yourself before you can even consider forgiving anybody else.
Great point. Such a great point. Absolutely. I will definitely drop all of your channels and links so people can reach out to you, and if they do want help, which I think a lot of us need help in breaking cycles, because they're inbred in our upgrowing, like how we grew up. They're there, and we need to find ways to break them, because like you said early in the podcast, we end up creating those same dynamics in our own children. And as I love the fact that you work specifically with moms, because you're part of helping future generations to become the person that God intended them to be, so that they don't have those fractured pieces that they too have to now work through. Right? I feel like all of us are going to have things that we have to work through, even if we were raised into the most perfect childhood. But you're helping to narrow those things and lessen those things that can be so much difficult and so much harder to break. So I praise you and I thank you for what you're doing. It's a God given gift, and God has given you that gift so that you can help others in His, field, so that those people can also see how they need to come to Him as well. So I thank you for coming on this podcast and blessing us with your knowledge, your expertise, and your wisdom. And I am so happy that your yes was to me and not to
Oh,
someone else.
well, thank you so much, Lynn. I appreciate this opportunity more than you can say. It's been an amazing conversation, and getting to know you and your story is, it's definitely been profound for me as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And we will I'll talk to you after, I guess. But until then, you have a blessed day and take care.
You too. Bye bye, everyone.
Bye. Whew, what a conversation. Oh my goodness. I shared so much today, guys. That was very revealing on my part as well. But Becky, thank you so much for your honesty, your wisdom, and the freedom that you're giving other women through your story and your work. I know somebody today that was listening is walking away feeling seen, heard, empowered, and ready to start breaking those cycles for good. I appreciate you guys continuing to listen. And to you, my purpose warriors, if today's episode spoke to you, be sure to connect with Becky. I'll have all our information linked to this description so that you guys can reach out to her if you need help breaking some of those childhood trauma cycles. And again, if you need help finding your purpose and walking in it, please reach out to me, Coach Lin. And you already know how to get to me. You can go on YouTube, you can see in my bio, there's a link, you can schedule a call or anything of that sort, and I'll be available to you. So you are worthy, you are called, and your purpose for more. Continue to walk in your purpose. And I will see you guys again on the next episode of Living Purposely on Purpose. Have a great day, guys.